So what happens in our blood? We have, um, in our blood, we have to maintain a certain pH. And that pH is 7.35 to 7.45. And if we have too much acid or too much base, we could have it can result in death. So where do we get carbon dioxide from in our bodies? Well, we continually produce carbon dioxide as a product of cellular metabolism. So what do I mean by that? Whenever we carry out respiration and you break down glucose, you end up with carbon dioxide and water. So what does our body do with it? Some of that is carried to the lungs for elimination as CO2 gas, and some of it actually dissolves in the body fluids, such as plasma, saliva. And when we dissolve CO2 in water, if you guys remember, we form carbonic acid. So we see here with the number 1 that we've got our first reaction in which CO2 dissolves in water to give us carbonic acid. Notice that it is a reversible reaction. Once we have carbonic acid in solution, it can easily dissociate to give us the bicarbonate and the hydronium ion. So that is our second reaction. So there are 2 steps in this process in which we have CO2 that dissolves in water to give us carbonic acid, which then dissociates or ionizes to give us bicarbonate and hydronium ion. Our kidneys also supply a portion of bicarbonate ion as it's forming urine. So we have CO2 that's produced in our cells, and our kidneys produce bicarbonate when necessary. So we have this buffer system where we've got CO2 made in our body cells and bicarbonate made in our kidneys, and we have this buffer system in all of our body fluids, and except for the ones that require a different pH, such as in our stomachs and in our pancreas creates bile, and then it's found in our small intestine. So if we have any excess acid or hydronium entering the body, then the bodily fluids is going to react with it's going to react with the bicarbonate. Remember, the buffer, if we add acid, then the base in the buffer is going to react with the acid, and we will have a shift in our equilibrium to the left. Okay, and if we have a decrease in our hydronium concentration, then our pH is only going to change slightly if we don't put too much acid in the system. Now, if we have excess hydroxide or base that is entering the body, it is going to react with the carbonic acid in the buffer system. And once it reacts with the acid, then the reaction shifts forward, unless we have a large amount of base added, and then our pH is going to change. So we resist changes in pH by shifting this buffer system when in the presence of an acid, strong acids, or strong bases. So how the carbonic acid concentration is related also to the partial pressure of carbon dioxide. So when there's too much carbon dioxide present in the blood, rising CO2 levels, it's going to increase the amount of carbonic acid and shift the reaction forward to produce more hydronium. Well, if we produce more hydronium, then we end up having a shift in the pH, and the pH is going to decrease. If we have too much CO2 in our body, we end up with a problem called acidosis. If now the CO2 levels in our bodies go down too low, as in the situation with hyperventilation, when you're and you're letting off too much CO2, then that shifts the equilibrium to reduce the amount of acid, and we end up increasing the blood pH, and this is a process called alkalosis. So here are some ways to so we have different types of acidosis. We either have respiratory acidosis, where we end up taking in too much carbon dioxide, or metabolic acidosis, where we take in too much acid. Notice the treatment is just by adding some sodium bicarbonate. Some people who have kidney problems have to take sodium bicarbonate pills because they tend to have high acid in their urine. Respiratory alkalosis, now meaning that the pH is high, can come from having too little CO2 in the blood, and the metabolic alkalosis occurs when we have too little acid in our blood. Okay, so take a look at the slide, and become familiar with it, especially if you're going to be in the health profession. This is something that would be useful for you to remember. So, during stress or trauma, a person can start to hyperventilate. The person might breathe into a paper bag to avoid fainting. Complete the sentence to describe the changes that occur in the blood pH during hyperventilation. So the word is during. My pen is not working. The word is during hyperventilation, right? So if it's during hyperventilation, then that means you're and what happens to the CO2 levels in the blood? Right, it will increase. Well, if the CO2 levels in the blood increase, then the carbonic acid levels are also going to, I said increase, right? I'm sorry. Hyperventilation, we end up losing too much CO2. So the CO2 level in the blood decreases, making the carbonic acid level decrease. And if we make the carbonic acid level decrease, the hydronium ion concentration decreases. And if the hydronium ion concentration decreases, then the blood pH goes up or down. Right, the blood pH is going to go up. So what do we have for our answer? All right, so that's during hyperventilation. What happens, do you think, while the person is breathing into the paper bag? Well, breathing into the paper bag causes you to take in carbon dioxide that you're breathing out. So if you're taking in more carbon dioxide, then the carbon dioxide level increases, the carbonic acid levels increase, the hydronium ion levels decrease, and then the pH now decreases. Okay, so the equilibrium in this reaction, when we actually hyperventilate, is going to shift in what direction? It's going to shift to the left. While breathing in the paper bag, the equilibrium is going to shift in what direction? To the right. All right.